Hello, and welcome back to Wild Sanative. In the previous episode of Untying Knots, I spoke about the painful process of beginning to untangle my life. I shared how healing often requires us to look honestly at the places where we have become stuck, the patterns we have accepted, and the stories we have carried for far too long. As I continued doing the work, something became increasingly clear. Some knots can not be untied by one person alone. As I became a student of Blanca Bayer and committed myself to my own healing journey, I began seeing things I had fully not allowed myself to see before. While the death of my son shattered my heart in ways I cannot adequately describe, I also began recognizing that there were areas in my life that I had been deeply unhappy long before the loss occurred. I began seeing the love I craved was not being given. I began seeing that respect was often missing. I began seeing subtle forms of division, dismissal, and disregard that had become normalized over time. I began seeing how certain behaviors and attitudes were being passed down and repeated. I began seeing how unappreciated I felt and how little compassion existed for the pain I was carrying. Most importantly, I began seeing that while I was doing everything I could do to heal, I could not heal my family by itself. Healing requires participation. Healing requires willingness. Healing requires people who care enough to look honestly at what is broken and choose to do something about it. I pleaded for counseling. I pleaded for us to come together after Danny passed away. I hope that such a devastating loss might inspire all of us to reach toward one another instead of further apart. But those requests were rejected. I was told I talked too much. Perhaps I did, but I had a lot to say. I had feelings, I had questions, I had pain. I had a perspective that deserved to be heard. And what hurt the most was not disagreement. What hurt the most was the unwillingness to engage. Because when someone continually shuts down conversation, what they are really communicating is that they do not wish to look at what is being asked of them. As time passed, I found myself facing a truth I never wanted to face. The decision to end my marriage became the hardest decision I ever made. It was not a decision made out of anger. It was not made because I stopped loving. Quite the opposite. I loved deeply. I loved enough to keep hoping. I loved enough to keep trying. I loved enough to keep believing that things could change. But eventually there comes a point where love alone is no longer enough. Relationships are partnerships. They require two people willing to participate, two people willing to examine themselves, two people willing to protect the foundation they have built together, two people willing to do the work. And when only one person is actively trying to heal, evolve, communicate, and repair the relationship becomes unsustainable. And I knew that. My heart wanted one thing, my eyes, my ears, and my mind were telling me something else. For the first time in my life, I had to choose myself. I had to acknowledge that my well-being mattered too. I had to acknowledge that I deserved more than I was receiving. And I had to acknowledge that continuing to sacrifice myself was not going to create the outcome I had hoped for. Making that choice broke my heart. It became yet another layer of grief added to a heart that was already carrying more grief than I thought possible. After the divorce, I left the door open. Part of me still hoped. Part of me still wondered if healing might happen. Perhaps there could be a new beginning. Perhaps the work could finally be done. Perhaps everyone could find their way back to one another. Then one day I heard something that changed everything. I heard someone casually say, "I deliberately poke holes in what she does." It was not only the statement itself, it was the tone, it was the laughter behind it. It was the complete lack of awareness about what those words revealed. And in that moment, I understood something I had been reluctant to admit. The family I had spent my life hoping for was never going to exist. The realization was another profound loss, because what died was not simply a marriage. What died was a dream, the dream of family I had had always hoped we could become. The truth hurt deeply. Not long after, I traveled to visit a friend in another state. While I was there, I experienced something unexpected. Peace, real peace, the kind of peace that settles into your nervous system and reminds you what safety feels like. The kind of peace that makes you realize how long you have been carrying tension. The kind of peace that makes you question whether you want to return to the life you left behind. When it came time to go home, I found myself not wanting to go back. As the weeks and months passed after I came back, another truth revealed itself. The phone did not ring, the messages did not come, there was no meaningful attempts to reconnect. No one seemed concerned about where I was or how I was doing. As painful as that was, it forced me to confront reality. I spent years feeling unwanted, feeling excluded, feeling as though I did not matter. And now that silence confirmed what I had been trying not to see. I just stopped arguing with reality. I stopped trying to convince people to care, and I stopped trying to earn a place in spaces where I was not being welcomed nor respected. And eventually I made a decision. I would leave. Not just the marriage, not just the life I had known. I would leave the environment itself. I would leave the place where I continually felt unseen, excluded, and emotionally abandoned. And so I did. What struck me most afterward was this. Not one person noticed. Not one. As painful as that realization was, it brought me clarity. Because it showed me that leaving was not abandonment. Leaving was self-preservation. I could no longer continue living in places that repeatedly communicated that I did not matter. I could no longer continue shrinking myself in hopes of being loved. And I could no longer sacrifice my well-being waiting for others to choose differently. Sometimes healing requires us to stay and work through what is difficult, and sometimes healing requires us to leave what is unwilling to change. And for me, leaving became the act of choosing life, an act of choosing peace, and an act of choosing myself. And while it broke my heart, it was also the beginning of finding it again. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, may you walk gently, breathe deeply, and continue your own path toward wholeness.